Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well today. I had an interesting idea. Let's ask the question, what is the best type of build you can run at meta level invasions? Now, this answer, I will be perfectly honest, is my opinion, but I think there's quite a lot of people that will agree with my opinion. And I'm going to go essentially from what I think number one is down to sort of the depths of what perhaps some of the later worse archetypes you can run are. So with that being said, first place and second place are so insanely close that it's really hard to decide which one's actually better because they both have such good upsides that if you were to choose to run one over the other, you're not going to be doing yourself any disservice. The first place for me personally is going to be Dexterity, and second place, very, very close behind it, honestly sometimes in first place based on how I'm feeling that day, is Faith. Now, the version of Faith that we're talking about is specifically somebody who is a Faith melee character. When it comes to both sorcery users and incantation users, I will talk about them in their own designated section. As an invader, you're going to have to expect that you're going to be fighting quite a couple 1v3s. And oftentimes, mages and incantation users do not hold up very well under pressure. And while almost any build is going to have a very hard time under the pressure of 3 people running them down, melee builds are most certainly going to, as a baseline, be able to handle this much better than any sorcerer or incantation user. Now, with that being said, a very large part of why Dexterity is in number 1 is because if you are invading, there's a lot of places on the map that you are probably invading, especially if you're at meta level where you probably have gotten every single area in the game unlocked. And what does almost every single area have? It either has water or it has rain weather. So, with that being said, lightning on its own already does a lot of damage. As far as I'm aware, it's one of the defenses that armor and whatnot generally has the least of. However, this is made even more potent by the fact that standing in water or being in the rain lowers your lightning defense even more. And while I don't know the exact numbers, it is a very, very significant amount. It's somewhere around 15 or 20%. If somebody could comment what it is, that'd be helpful, thank you. But yes, it is a very strong amount. And while Lightning Strike, the Ash of War, is not very useful as a Ash of War you actually intend to hit your opponent with, just the fact that it buffs your weapon with lightning damage, already bolstering these first 2 amazing qualities, makes it to where just about any weapon that you can feasibly use on a Dexterity build is going to do utterly outrageous damage. Not to mention that Dexterity probably has the strongest lineup of power stance options in its arsenal, and it also has access to what I would probably consider the strongest weapon in the game right now, which is Naga Kiba. Reason being that being as long as it is, being able to be power stanced for as much damage as it will do, and also the fact that it can have Spinning Slash, which is just utterly stupid on Naga Kiba, now that it always 3-hit combos. It really will do like 900 damage when your Dexterity build is built properly if you hit the full 3 combo. And because it's so long, oftentimes you can just monkey brain press Spinning Slash again, and as they're trying to roll out of it, catch them again. And so in total you're doing upwards of like 1500, 1700 damage. It's really ridiculous, honestly. Now, as of the recent patch, Hand of Millennia has become the premier one-shot tool for a Dexterity build. However, you also do get access to Stormhawk Axe. Now, you will see strength builds use Stormhawk Axe quite a bit, but having access to it is better than not having access to it, so that's nice. And yeah, whether you're talking about power stance straight swords, whether you're talking about thrusting swords, heavy thrusting swords, Knight's Greatsword, any of these things, you are able to make any weapon do obscene amounts of damage, whether it be with the Lightning Strike and stacking as much lightning damage as possible, or say if you're using something where like you want to do, say, thrust damage, then you can also run Keen, but generally speaking, you're going to be running lightning. The times where you will be running Keen is when you do plan on trying to get thrusting hit counters, and that can also be quite nice, say, if you're using Piercing Fang. Piercing Fang's not great in a 1v3 scenario, but if you're in a 2v2 scenario, due to the amount of distance it travels, you can definitely mix up your opponent, shooting for one opponent rather than the other, and throwing them off guard and getting a juicy 900, 1000 damage, something crazy like that. And that's not even really factoring in if it's a counter hit, in which case, yeah, they're probably very handily getting two-shot by that. But enough about Dexterity, let's talk a little bit about Faith. Now, obviously in the past, I made a video talking all about how the Faith Invasion build was, in my opinion, the strongest in the game. Well, as of patch 1.10, other than Black Flame Protection, the Elemental Resistance protections have all been nerfed, and I personally thought that they nerfed them too much. Now, stuff like Barrier of Gold and whatnot, the ones that gave 60 elemental resistance to a stat, now only give 20%, which is literally a third as much as it was going to protect you beforehand. I think if they were going to nerf it, 30% was much more reasonable, especially considering that Black Flame Protection is still around 30 or 35%. But yeah, Faith has a lot of things still going for it that make it to where its damage is outrageously high. And even with this extremely high damage, you also have these protective spells. Sure, they're nowhere near as strong as they used to be, but they're going to be stronger than, say, the Dried Proof livers that other builds will get, or just the basic fortifications. Black Flame Protection is still the behemoth it's always been, so there is no complaining you can do about that. And a ton of your damage can simply be wrapped up by saying, Sacred Blade. Sacred Blade is going to make your holy damage go through the roof, and also, unlike Lightning Strike, which is not very useful other than buffing your weapon with lightning, Sacred Blade actually has a chance of hitting your opponent, because while it is a fairly slow projectile, you can still Estus punish somebody with it, you can still hit someone with it who's not paying attention to you, whereas that's just not really the case with Lightning Strike. If you hit someone with Lightning Strike, your opponent was just simply putting their controller down. Faith also still gets a host of great weapons that maybe they aren't usually using Sacred Blade, but are using something else that's extremely good. Say like any polearm weapon that is using the Black Flame Tornado, that scales with Faith, and its damage on a Faith build is definitely in one-shot territory. It is one of the strongest get-off-me tools in the game, and yeah, when someone starts getting caught in it, very, very infrequently will someone roll the final hit of Black Flame Protection where they don't just immediately get annihilated. You also have great weapons such as Power Stance Coated Swords, the Michelin Knight Sword, you have your Ordovis Greatsword, you have Blasphemous Blade, God forbid, you still have the Sacred Relic Sword. You have a ton of options. I'm only mentioning a couple here. You truly do get a great host of different weapons at your disposal. And that's not even mentioning healing spells, regeneration spells. Faith has a ton going for it. Even though it received a massive nerf, that really goes to show how much further ahead it was than every other build in 1.09. Because in 1.10, it has received the buffs it has, not buffs, nerfs that it has, and it still manages to be really damn good. The next one is, once again, a insanely powerful build that you can put together that is only going to be a slight bit behind Dexterity and Faith in terms of its capabilities and its power level, and that's going to be an intelligence scaling melee build. The intelligence melee character might have the best range of Ash of Wars to use in the game. The amount of unique weapons that are extremely potent in its arsenal is bar none, to put it simply. So, to get the ugly duckling out of the way that carries the build, not actually, but kind of does, Moonveil. Moonveil is Moonveil, and if you are playing Elden Ring and not using Moonveil and ulting over and over, it is a skill issue. pressing L2 is the only thing you should do in this game. But to actually stop being a prick about it, Moonveil is perhaps the biggest, like the highest bell curve of Estus Punish in terms of how easy it is to land versus how much damage it does. If you're not talking about any other aspect of how good Moonveil can be, whether it's power stancing it with another katana, whether it's just the damage it will do if you just land it straight from neutral, or you've got your opponent panicking and they really think that they're gonna just be able to panic over and over and not get hit by the Ash of War, then yes, it's great in all those situations. But this is especially annoying when it is the host's team that is doing this. But if someone is healing and you have Moonveil, you can just decide that they are not going to heal, essentially. They get to waste a Crimson Tear, and what did it cost you? Like, what, 10 blue, 15 blue? Like, it's nothing. And then you've also got great stuff such as Wing of Estelle, Bastard Stars. You have some of the best great swords in the game. You have Helfen Steeple, which is absolutely monstrous with an offhand frozen Wakizashi, Frost Wakizashi. Or you could also run, now granted, this one may not be as powerful as it is now in future patches because this is a bug. The Moonlight Greatsword, its second R1 is bugged and combos into its third R1. And rather than doing half poise damage, it only does a portion less poise damage. The poise damage is something like 165, so it's still going to break any and all passive poise. So yeah, you've got some of the best great swords in your arsenal. I don't know how you would be running this at meta, but if you somehow managed it, the Falling Star Beast's Mandible is essentially Thunderbolt, but for intelligence, and it's very nice. It hits very hard. But once again, that's speccing so hard into strength that this is probably more so something for level 150. But yeah, you've got a ton of great weapons. You also have great Ashes of War like Glintstone Pebble. Now granted, yes, I know Glintstone Pebble is not the one-shot machine it was on release. It is not the 2-pump chump that it was in 1.0, but what it is on a intelligence build, the first bit of it goes really far now, and so it is a very non-committal pebble that you can throw out at your opponent, and if you're in a 2v2 situation, the follow-up still does shitloads of damage. And so if you're in a situation where all 4 of you guys are fighting in a similar space, then you lock onto the other opponent and then hit them with the second half of the Glintstone Pebble while they're not focusing. Is this going to happen all that much? No, not really. When you invade, usually it's a 3v1. But if it is a 2v2 scenario, you do have that going for you, and it's very nice. Now, you also have phenomenal things such as the Death Ritual Spear. It's kind of stupid. Actually, funny enough, the clip in the back has me fighting it right now. But its Ash of War, for some reason, got buffed a patch or two ago, and it's just like a long-range firestorm and is extremely spammable. I don't know what they were thinking when they buffed it, but whatever, here we are. Phenomenal weapon. You've also got the Death Poker. While it is a more niche weapon, it can still do crazy amounts of damage with its Ash of War, getting frostbites and stuff like that. And speaking of frostbite is an insanely powerful reaction, whether it be surprising your opponent with some really good burst damage, or because it lowers defenses once it's procced, in which case you can frostbite someone and then swap back to magic infused weapons, which will have a higher AR, and there you go. You've both frostbitten them, which gives you the benefits of that, and then you also are able to swap over to something that just for your build has more AR, which is phenomenal. There's also a couple of sorceries that you could use, even though you're mostly going to be a melee character, that can still be very helpful for you. Terra Magica is going to be a good damage bonus if you are in a position where you are able to, say, just launch Moonveils off, or trying to pepper someone with Glintstone Pebble. Just any good Ash of War that is also going to be ranged is going to be even better inside of Terra Magica. You also have the Glintstone Dart, the one that hangs in the air for a minute before it actually fires. That is able to disrupt your opponent a ton. They immediately don't want to get hit by that sorcery, which allows you to play much more aggressively. You also have stuff like Zamor Ice Storm, which if you are, say, hiding around a corner while people are running at you, oblivious to what you're doing, then yes, you can get a very, very convincing pseudo combo into a potential one-shot. You really can do a lot with Zamor Ice Storm if you set it up properly. It's, of course, not for all situations. It is a niche sorcery, but when it works, it is very nice. That is for sure. Now, fourth on the list is going to be Strength build. Now, if you were to go far enough back into the game, I may have said that Strength was the strongest due to the weapons and their power level that were available for it. Well, the thing is that Strength is still extremely good, do not get me wrong. It is a phenomenal build to run. The level of completeness you feel with a Strength build due to your variety and stuff of the sort. Good damage, high amounts of variety, tons of hyper armor weapons to work with. What holds Strength back a little bit more than what has come before it is that fire damage, while not exclusively what Strength builds do, Flaming Strike being the buffer, the fire buffer of your fire weapons, it's a very good Ash of War, do not get me wrong. However, since there are so many areas where you are going to be fighting in water or in rain, a very significant portion of your build is going to be handicapped because of that. While yes, technically Faith builds also do fire damage, they are so complete with Sacred Blade and Holy damage on their own that even though your fire damage is going to be lower sometime, you're really not going to feel like you've lost anything if you swap to Holy weapons. Now for a Strength build, of course you are able to do plenty of damage with your physical weapons, but the difference when you're fighting in rain is more felt. Having your Flaming Strike not one-shot or not kill in the moment you needed it to just because it's raining as of the moment is a very frustrating feeling. It's a very small detraction from what is one of the best bread and butter builds in the game, but the things that are higher than it, I think they just don't have something quite like that to worry about. Also, Strength is probably a very good starter invasion build because you're going to have all these great hyper armor weapons, and hyper armor weapons, generally speaking, are easier to play with for the most part. So yeah, you have quite a bit going for you, whether it's just you like keeping it simple or you just want to stay an old-fashioned Strength build. I think it's a great build. It's just there's a couple things I would rate higher than it. Next, what I would have at 5th place is going to be an Arcane character. Now, Arcane is a very interesting archetype when it comes to melee builds. You have extremely powerful options all across the board, but the thing is that the strength of an Arcane build can be largely dependent on how passive or aggressive your opponent is. See, if you are fighting a party of 3 people that are playing extremely passively and are giving you nothing to work with, then those bleeds and poisons and stuff of the sort, you're just generally not going to get them very easily at all, if at all. Now, granted, if your opponents are not very good when it comes to, say, panic rolling, or they just are one out of hit stun over and over, stuff like that, a Arcane build is going to have some of the best burst damage or DPS over time that you could ask for in a build. It's just that we have to factor in the occasions where you're fighting really good players or just really shy players that don't want to approach you at all. In which case, yes, you are going to fight people that are going to ball us on every single bleed and poison proc you almost get. Yes, you're going to fight people that give themselves so few ample times to actually attack them that you're not getting these really important damage windows. Now, granted, I know that obviously you're going to be doing direct damage just with the weapons that you're using, but if we're taking out of the equation the damage you will be getting from bleeds and whatnot, then yes, you're a melee build that just does not do quite as much damage as what's higher than it. Now, people sleep on poison massively. Poison does do good damage, and the buffs from the Mushroom Crown and the Exaltation are phenomenal. They did not get nerfed like the bleed ones did, even though they were perhaps more deserving of a nerf. But, you know, FromSoft has a tendency of listening to Reddit for these types of things. Don't get me wrong, it's a very powerful archetype, and I don't have the most experience with an arcane character. I can just see it being very frustrating in, say, the 20% of times where you're fighting someone that's extremely passive, and you will not have the ability to finish a fight in the same time frame that a Faith character will, or a Dexterity character will, which just at a baseline without having to try and get bleed or poison or whatnot, will just have a higher baseline. Now, you do have some really good weapons. You have Moog's Great Spears, which if you're power stancing those, that's one of the stronger setups you can do in the game. That's extremely potent. PSGS is nowhere near the behemoth that it used to be. It's still extremely strong, but with everything being able to break passive poise on the first hit almost, a lot of its blendering potential did rely on passive poise, so still insanely strong, not as free as it used to be, but that is okay, still extremely strong. You have, say, any bleed weapon that is really strong. You can run Power Stance Cross Naginata, which you can also run on a Dex build, but on an Arcane build, you can run it with Occult and Seppuku if you choose. It doesn't even have to be Seppuku, but just even Occult, and you're still going to bleed a very large frequency. You're gonna bleed still a lot of the time. You do have some great options like that. Any weapon that has a bleed multiplier when either put on poison or occult will allow you to do both good damage and either stack 2 different procs or stack the one that you didn't even infuse it for very well, which is nice. Also, something worth mentioning is, say, Venomous Fang. If you run Occult Venomous Fang, you get the benefits of running a claw weapon with its running R2 to R2 true combo, extremely high damage, and the special version of poison, which lasts less time but does a lot more damage per tick. It's a very powerful weapon. It's really, really good. What can I say? And I suppose another fairly large problem that Arcane can have is that there are certain Ashes of War that are just not as good on an Arcane build. You don't get as good of damage or access to, say, some of the different elemental ones like Flaming Strike. You don't get very good damage on Thunderbolt. Essentially stuff that scales more so with strength characters, dex characters, stuff like that. If it's just one that's physical, then sure, that's fine. But in terms of the good ones that are specifically tied to a specific element, Arcane is not really going to benefit that much from. Also, it's worth mentioning that when it comes to Ashes of War that are innately occult scaling, there's only 2 as far as I'm aware of, which is Lifesteal Fist and Spectral Lance, and the first one is complete dog shit, and the second one is pretty bad. So, yeah, the Ash of War selection very, very much relies on the Ashes of War that you can infuse with like poison or bleed or something like that, occult, but are not directly from that archetype of build, if that makes sense. Also, something that's extremely slept on is Bloody Slash. If you're running a full Arcane character and you hit someone with a well set up Bloody Slash, it just does borderline like pre any update Elden Ring damage. Like, the damage on Bloody Slash, if you properly set it up, is truly obscene. And by when I say properly set it up, I mean use a weapon that has good hit stun on, say, the running R2 or a jumping attack, and it flows nicely into a Bloody Slash to panic roll catch your opponent. Now, obviously, they don't always panic roll or anything like that, but the thing is that a lot of the times with these setups that do catch very well, then what will end up happening is you will, say they R1 or something out of hit stun. Well, the Hyper Armor of Bloody Slash is still going to catch them. So it can be very, very good. You just cannot use it stupidly from neutral. Now I suppose it's worth mentioning some of the builds that I would not really recommend using unless you have a specific idea in mind or you're just better than I am. One of the long-time Souls builds that has always reigned somewhere in the better options that you could run is completely worthless in this game, and that is a quality build. So quality, the idea behind quality has always been that sure, you do not have the most optimal damage in comparison to, say, strength or dex or whatever it might be, but you have a very good variety of weapons that you can use. You're able to borrow weapons from both sides of the spectrum. However, the problem with that in Elden Ring is that there are so many good weapons in both strength and dexterity that is not very valuable. Like, sure, if you're one of these YouTubers that loves doing like these crazy swaps to crazy things, then maybe quality will have more of a use to you. However, quality scaling infused Ash of Wars are going to be doing noticeably less than other things that you could be considering, such as Keen, not even considering Holy and stuff like that, or say you're not fighting in rain, but a Flaming Strike infused weapon with fire on it. Yes, quality is going to be doing much worse in these instances. Quality doesn't innately have a secondary element that is associated with it. It will be able to do all right with lightning, it will be able to do all right with fire, Ashes of War, but it's not going to do as good as dexterity and strength. And so quality is really not going to gain that much in value at all until you are an over-leveled player, you are in the multiple hundreds. Then it's like, okay, quality starts serving somewhat of a purpose. At meta level, I've tried in the past, you just end up doing less damage than everything else, and the variety does not feel significant at all. So unless you are very, say, set in your ways, you're very, say, just going for a specific setup idea, I don't recommend quality. It will end up being worse than both strength and dexterity. Next up, I don't recommend you using a intelligence faith character. There's really, as of the current moment, not much that this type of archetype is able to play with. While yes, you can dip your toes into just individual bits of intelligence and faith, the skulls are probably the best sorcery or incantation that this type of build gets. The skulls are extremely annoying, do not get me wrong, but does that justify an entire build? Yes, you get Sword of Night and Flame, but like, does that justify an entire build? Like, the laser's not even really all that good anymore, and the Flame Swath, like, I don't know, unless your opponent's just not paying attention to you, like, are you really going to hit them with it? And the thing is that this character archetype not only is very limited in options, but also is so starved of stats as of the current moment. You're either doing subpar damage with intelligence stuff or subpar damage with face stuff, or you're using the very small range of things that are actually both intelligence and faith scaling, and end up feeling like you have no defenses, no HP, stuff like that. You're too short on FP, etc., etc. This is a type of build that doesn't really even start working all that well until like 150 or just higher than meta. Don't get me wrong, it's very cool, but like, this is not Dark Souls 3 where, 30-30 dark builds exist. This is Elden Ring where they quite literally did not add a single infusion that works well on both scaling ends of the spectrum. And to wrap it up, like I said earlier, I don't think sorcerers or incantation characters are all that good for running in invasions. Not that they aren't good, not that you can't one-shot somebody, not that you can't destroy someone that's not looking at you, but the thing is that these builds, what causes them to not be that much of a recommendation in my book is how they falter when they are under pressure. So, yeah, I would use them at your own risk. If you start getting chased down by, say, 3 people, then you're going to have a problem. But if you're not worried about that, then maybe try it. They do funny things and, funny big damage. But with that being said, I will see you guys later. Peace.